how's it going? My name is Rosendo Pili from Major League Hacking. I am the customer success manager here, and as such, I get to work with some of our great customers at Major League Hacking, one of them being the United States Space Force. Today, we have a special treat in line for everyone that is attending Bone Hackathon or the Hackathon this weekend, and we're going to be speaking to Specialist Carrino, who is a defensive cyberspace operator at the United States Space Force. So without any further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and bring him on screen here so that everyone can meet him. There you go. How's it going, Specialist Carrino?
Good. How are you doing today?
Doing great. I was just doing a brief introduction for you and the audience. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
I think I covered it.
Awesome. All right. Well, as I mentioned, Specialist Carrino is currently in the U.S. Space Force, so we're just going to go ahead and have a little conversation back and forth so that y'all could get a better idea of, the types of opportunities and career opportunities and, opportunities for advancement that there are within the U.S. Space Force itself. So, yeah, I guess the first question right off the bat is, when was the first time you actually heard about the Space Force?
Well, I believe it was in the summer of about 2018. I just heard it in passing in the news, and I was like, oh, that's interesting.
So 2014, and prior to that, had you been in the military already?
No, I hadn't. I was actually finishing my bachelor's in history of all things. I don't really come from a technical background, so when I did join the military, it was definitely a change going straight into IT from getting a degree in history.
Yeah, I absolutely hear you. Yeah, I feel like that's one of those career paths that happened for a lot of folks. Did you decide to go into IT as soon as you got into the military? What was it?
So yes, I came in with a contract for doing pretty much just base comm stuff. So I was a client systems technician.
Awesome. So so you had first heard about the U.S. Space Force. You had mentioned you heard about it on the news. What were your initial thoughts about that?
So my initial thoughts is probably what most people thought. I thought it was a pretty goofy idea. It made me really think of Star Trek or other military sci-fi. So I was like, huh, that's interesting. So I really didn't understand the space, the military space mission, other than GPS, which everyone knew. I'm pretty sure at the time I knew the Air Force controlled GPS, and then also I'm guessing satellite communications was what I kind of thought the military had going on in space too. But now in hindsight, once I've been in the Space Force, I do realize that the Space Force definitely needed to be a thing.
Absolutely. So you said previously you thought it was really sci-fi, kind of an idea that was maybe out there. And you finally you joined and you came to this understanding of what was really involved, right? What was going on a day-to-day basis. Given your initial reaction, how did you come to that decision that you did in fact want to join the Air Force, the Space Force, pardon?
So I saw it as a career advancement, obviously, and I also thought it would be really cool to join the first branch that has been stood up since the Air Force in 1947. So the career advancement was definitely a big part of it. And I also had heard that Space Force was going to move more towards cyber operations rather than the traditional IT, which I was doing at the moment. So I was like, you know what? I think I want to get into that.
Awesome. Yeah. So could you describe your I know you had mentioned you had heard about the Space Force, and I'm assuming prior to that you were already in the Air Force.
Yes, I was at the time.
So could you describe kind of the transition between you going from the Air Force as a client systems technician or whatever your first role was, and then eventually landing in the Space Force as a cyber operator?
Yes. So this kind of goes back. I was in the Air Force when I first heard that Space Force had actually stood up. It was in December of 2019. So I was like, oh, that's actually happening. That's funny. And so then I actually ended up getting stationed at Schriever Air Force Base at the time, which was, an Air Force Space Command base. Mm-hmm. I'll go into a little bit of the application process. So once I was already at Schriever and filling this traditional IT role as a client systems tech, they announced, and I believe it was about spring of 2020, that they were going to allow people in my career field, which was 3 Delta, which was pretty much just IT communications, to actually apply to the Space Force, because Space Force saw that we were going to be a part that needed to happen, more or less. So I applied to Space Force through getting my commander to sign a document pretty much stating that I could be released from the Air Force, that they could release me to join the Space Force. And if I was picked up by Space Force, then I would be, discharged and then re-enlisted into the Space Force. So out of about the 10 people who applied in my office at the time, they only picked 3 of us. So it was pretty selective. We were actually kind of shocked because we were already in, a space base pretty much. So it definitely made me feel pretty, glad, important a little bit.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, so I'm gonna jump back to my Air Force background. So I was, as I stated earlier, I was just traditional base IT. So, doing everything that a normal IT guy would be. So I was client systems. So Geek Squad is the best way to look at us. So anything client base is what we would do. So I did a lot of hardware stuff, which I love still. I still get to do a little bit of that as an additional duty, and I do like it. So, a lot of replacing hardware, so hard drives, power supplies, NICs that go bad. Because you would be surprised how often some of these machines are run, 24/7, 7 days a week. Stuff goes bad on them. We also got a lot into when Windows 10 rolled out. We had to re-image all these computers to the baseline Windows 10 image that the Air Force uses. We also installed a lot of Air Force approved software because we were local admins. And we also just did, general client systems troubleshooting. On top of doing a lot of this, host-based stuff, we also got to do some database management. Okay. So through that, we got to use Active Directory where, we controlled, didn't control necessarily, but we got to, make sure all the computers were correct in the system and then user accounts and stuff like that. So as I stated earlier, my first duty station was Trooper, so I was kind of used to the space culture a little bit. I'd seen some of the operational side, but not much other than just occasionally coming into an ops floor to fix something that was going bad, But it kind of was a culture shock when I moved from the support role to the actual performing the mission role. And I still kind of struggle with that at times because I always think of stuff in the support role. I got to fix stuff, not actually do the mission. So I think a lot of people from my career field probably feel the same way. There's just a different culture that we came from. On top of that, I had a little bit of difficulty with the training because I'm only a, client side guy. You get shoved into this training where you're learning Linux, which I never really dealt with before, then my Mac operating system, which is part of the, Unix family. And also more of the security and networking side. So the only real security computer expertise I have is I have a Sec Plus cert. And so it definitely was a little bit of a shock when I transitioned from the Air Force to the Space Force.
Absolutely. I mean, I could see that there was a shock there, but also I could see that, you had a lot of opportunities to learn new things, obviously being heavy Mac user and then all of a sudden having to learn CMD or, having to learn shell scripting in Linux. It's a kind of a jump, right?
It's definitely, yeah. I was used to a little bit of PowerShell and CMD on the Microsoft side just for my job, but back to the Mac side, I used a MacBook in college, and that was about the extent. I could use Word.
Absolutely. So it's pretty amazing to me, how you went from someone who was just who's studying history, and as you mentioned, you used Word on a MacBook before, to someone that now probably is very, very proficient at using multiple types of operating systems, and now also working as a cyber operator in the United States Space Force, a branch of the military that is responsible to for keeping America's network safe, right? So it's really interesting. And could you give us a timeline, how long it took you to get from kind of point A being your history major to point B being right now?
Yes, so I graduated in the spring of 2018. I was looking around for jobs. I could have taught history. It was kind of funny in hindsight. I was like, what, I really don't want to do that. So started looking around. I always wanted to join the military. So I finally ended up enlisting. I was about 25 at the time. So from there, went through basic military training at Lackland, went to Keesler for my technical school, which was a client systems technician, where we learned, the basic tools of the trade, a little bit of Active Directory stuff, and then somewhat of the hardware side. And then from there, get stationed at Schriever and then do a majority of my on-the-job training there, which is one thing the military does really good of is I never realized like how much learning actually happens when you're actually like, sitting there doing it compared to just like sitting in a classroom, because I was used to that through college.
Yeah.
So that was one thing that like all of that experience I got definitely helped me when crossing over to the cyber defense side, because I already had kind of like an idea of like, how to use PowerShell and a little bit of the security side and some of the networking side.
That's pretty interesting. This just came to me. At Major League Hacking, one of our founders was actually like, a history major just like yourself, and he was going to go into be like he was going to teach history out of college,
Yeah,
and like until
but
it's pretty amazing, like like just kind of like the the parallel there. But yeah, now he's a founder of the place that I work at, so it's it's funny how things turn out.
Yeah, I'll say one thing on that. It is funny because two of the guys in my old work center too were also history degree holders. So I was like, huh, this is funny.
Well, I guess you were in good company, I must say. It's so you talked about like how you got from point A to point B. My question to you is, how does like being a defensive cyberspace operator tie into the cyber operations career field at the United States Space Force?
So for the cyber operations career field, like the foundation of cyber operations is cyber defense. So pretty much everyone who will do anything in cyber operations will start as cyber defense. It's the cornerstone, more or less. So as we develop more of these cyber squadrons and we stand them up, we will pull the people who have a true aptitude for cyber defense into the offensive cyber capabilities. So cyber defense is, the starting point for any cyber operator in the U.S. Space Force.
I see. So basically, it's providing you the foundation to kind of like succeed in your role currently.
Yes, pretty much.
All right. So even though you're assigned as, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no.
Okay. No worries. So even though you're assigned as like a defense cyber operator, you also hold a unique position in a training team. Could you tell us more about that?
Yes. So for me, I'm currently one of the members of our squadron's training team. So when it comes to standing up these cyber squadrons, a lot of people that were in my shoes and a lot of people who, have been in 16, 17 years too, have this experience in these specialized IT roles, such as networking, desktop support, and even radio communications. But there's not a whole lot of us who actually have true cyber operation experience. So it's important that we get them to the unit and then we get them trained. So as far as training goes, I'm tasked with, in processing members to training with the squadron, tracking the training completion they do, scheduling the training that is not performed in-house by us, and helping build elements of the training pipeline that's unit specific, because each one of our units supports a delta, and that delta has specific mission specifics it needs us to defend. So for that, I'll go into a little bit of our training pipeline. So for our training pipeline, if you were a new member enlisting in the Space Force, you're going to enlist under the old Air Force job code, which are Air Force specialty codes. So for me, I was a 3 Delta 1X1, which is client systems. So we have these guys going through tech school too. And for that, for tech school, mine was 3.5 months. Some people might be a little longer, and this takes place at Keesler. All of the cyber support career fields take their training at Keesler. So for me, I was client systems. There's also cyber transport, which is the networking people. There's also cybersecurity, which is information assurance. So all these tech schools have varying lengths. So from there, you get to your first unit. So if you get to us, which is the 6th Cyber First Squadron, we have you doing about 14 weeks of computer-based trainings where you watch videos and you do labs on the computer. From there, we send you out to, most of the time we send them to down to Buckley in Denver to do an 8-week course called Intermediate Cyber Core, which is 4 blocks. The first block being Windows fundamentals, the second one being Linux, the third being networking techniques, and the fourth being security practices. So this is pretty much like everyone's first experience to more or less the cyber training pipeline versus doing your conventional IT role. From there, we have another 3-week course that takes place at Buckley Space Force Base at the moment too, which is Defense or Cyber Core Space Fundamentals. This has 3 blocks, and it teaches us specific tools that we use to perform defensive cyber operations. when people come to our unit also, we have about a 3-month mission qualification training, which is on-the-job training. And our hope in the end is we can get people mission ready in about 8 to 9 months.
Very nice. So it's a pretty aggressive timeline that you're putting forth to get someone that's, basically coming in with maybe like limited experience, right?
Yes.
And then getting them up and running. And like that's like the main component of your job right now, is like making sure that they're training and that they're like, progressing positively throughout the program, right?
It is, and this will change as the Space Force gets more of a concrete training program.
Mhm.
So for right now, they're still doing the Air Force job codes, but we will develop our own, which is purely cyber when you come in. So this is just for, at the moment, and probably the next couple of years.
Interesting. Just to kind of like veer off track a little bit here. You mentioned like, the training and like how it takes 9 months. Do you have any pointers for anyone that might be interested in, going into the cyber operations career field and like, maybe going through the type of training that you would put them through? Like what would help them to succeed and what would set them apart?
Definitely getting a little bit more of knowledge beforehand. So for me, like the Linux thing, as I pointed out earlier, I wish I had looked up a little bit more of it before I had gone through like the actual cyber portion, because I struggled with it because I knew a little bit of command shells through Windows, but as far as Linux is a whole different animal when it comes to that. The same with networking. I wish I had, maybe looked into networking a little bit more because I was purely host side. So I was like, okay, I really wish I would have prepared a little bit more for that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But with that being said, everything that you needed was already provided to you in order for you to. That's amazing.
It was a great training pipeline, honestly. I learned a lot. Some people might not have, just because they came from, a networking background. But for me personally, like I left that training, like the 8-week course, intermediate cyber core. And I was like, okay, like I feel like I have learned a lot of knowledge in 8 weeks.
That's amazing. I feel like going through that type of training and just like not really having like, or at least like, based on what you're telling me, like not really having like that type of background, like prior to, you sound very confident in like, your ability to go in, and obviously you probably are, because you're now training other folks in the same proficiencies. So it just goes to show it's probably a very effective training program in general.
Yes, it is. Especially on the job training that we do. Like that is definitely what probably teaches you the most.
Amazing. Speaking of on the job training and just on the job experience, how does your involvement on this training team tie into the Delta mission that you're currently assigned to and the overall Space Force mission? And just for more context for everyone out there, like a Delta is sort of just like a grouping within the United States Space Force. But I'll let you explain more about that if needed.
Yes. So I'm gonna give you some background here. So when I first got to my unit, there was about 28 Guardians and Air Force personnel at the time. They have since moved stations back to the Air Force due to us being a Space Force purely squadron. So for that, there was 28 people when I got there. We are now projected to be upwards of almost 150 by summertime of next year. So the reason that we have gained so many new Guardians coming into the unit is we will eventually split into 4 separate units that support 4 separate Deltas. So it is very important for all these people to come in, get trained by us, and then go out into these different squadrons and be able to form their roles there. So I'll go into like what a Delta is and like what we support. So a Delta is a grouping of squadrons that have similar mission sets. So Delta 9 would be orbital warfare. Delta 8, which we directly support right now as the 61st Cyber Squadron, is GPS and also military satellite communications. Delta 2 is going to be space awareness, so just tracking satellites in space and space debris. And then Delta 3 is going to be space electronic warfare. So we split into 4 squadrons. All these people will be trained up on how to interact with these mission systems. And part of that training that we do is we do a mission qualification training. So for this, like the intro, we'll give like a basic overview of like who we are, what we do. And then we'll also give an overview of all of our mission partners. So these different Deltas and what their missions are. So from there, we also teach people during this mission qualification training on pretty much some of our tools. So we use out-of-band tools, which is a series of taps and aggregators that sit in key places on our mission system so we can see, the data. With that, we use Kibana pretty much for our out-of-band visualizations on dashboards. And we also use like some intrusion detection systems such as Suricata. For in-band, we use Logarithm, and then we also use, I believe at the moment, Zeek, but those are more of our in-band tools.
It's very interesting. So basically, right now, your training and the folks that you work with, you're basically setting up like what the U.S. Space Force is going to look like, years down the road. Hopefully, like these are like frameworks that you're helping to create that'll kind of like guide the way that the Space Force kind of tackles these problems moving forward.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a very rewarding opportunity because like this is how we're going to train every future Guardian. This is standing up other squadrons. So this is like making history pretty much.
Amazing. I had a conversation with another Guardian during another Q&A, and we kind of likened where the U.S. Space Force is right now to maybe like a startup, right? It's like it's very much you're able to get in on the ground floor right now, and I feel like maybe someone in your position at a more established branch of the military wouldn't have the same type of direct impact with the way things are going to go in the future.
They probably wouldn't. And that's why I was so glad that I did end up getting selected by the Space Force. Like, I'm a Specialist 4, so in the Air Force, a senior airman. I feel like I would not have had this same opportunity if I was still in the Air Force. I'm pretty much like sitting here like helping develop training for every future Guardian to come through. So, I mean, it is definitely a unique opportunity that I'm very, very glad that I have. And I'm very thankful for my, supervisors and bosses. They were, were able to put me into this slot.
It's amazing. And speaking about the spot that you're in, and we talked at a high level, I think, about all the things that the U.S. Space Force wants to prepare in terms of training and just in terms of like organization. With that in mind, could you tell us about a time when your actions or the actions of your team have maybe denied some of our adversaries in the safe and kept our space system safe?
So for this, I can't really go into specific examples of real world actions because of classification concerns, but anything with space gets, classified pretty quickly. But I can say it's some of the types of cyber attacks that we're trying to help defend against, like ransomware attacks that we always see in the news. And then also like, stuff like the SolarWinds attack, which was supply chain based and things of that nature. So for us, when we are actively doing missions, so we are working to fuse pretty much like intelligence with our cyber operations. So one thing that we do is escort missions. So for space launches. So say if a satellite is, we launch and it's traveling over Guam, where one of our remote tracking stations is. We have the IP ranges pretty much for that remote tracking station for its network. And so for Intel will give us, known threat actors and their known exploits. And we'll be able to, fine tune our tools and detection systems to like be able to, see if any of these are trying to, interact with our system. Our next one, we normally do like reconnaissance missions. So if there's a known cyber attack happening in the commercial sector, more or less, we were tasked with running reconnaissance on our own mission systems to look for, those indicators of compromise to make sure that they're not actively on our mission systems also. So those are just some of the, missions that we typically run.
Very interesting. So, I mean, really, right now it sounds as if all of the training and all of the setup is actually like going towards like I guess efforts that are very worthwhile for us and for our safety and the safety of our systems.
100%, because it's when it comes to these like the cyber squadrons that we're standing up, like each individual of these deltas and the squadrons in these deltas, like each individual of these squadrons have their own mission system networks. And so these, require a lot of training to actually like get to know these networks, and a lot of very important for national security, for GPS and, all of our military like satellite communications. These are very important that we protect these.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to hear about like, how far you've come from, your undergrad to where you're at now. Maybe even just like, I feel like it's almost like we're glossing over just the fact that you went from someone who was like, fairly non-technical to someone who seems to be incredibly proficient at what they currently do. So, kudos to you for that.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as like, like all of the opportunities that you've already received within like, the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Space Force, what do you see for yourself in the future?
For the future, I definitely want to stay in this career field. I really enjoy it. I think it's definitely, marketable. Eventually, when my time in the military, comes to an end, rather it be, 8 years, 20 years. I think all the skills that, I've gained on the inside of the Space Force too, as like a career, um, it definitely will help me on the outside sector too.
Absolutely. I think one of the distinctive qualities of everyone that I've ever spoken to from like either the U.S. Space Force or the U.S. Air Force, conducting this Q&A is everyone's keenness towards like going after an advanced degree. And I know we were just talking about it earlier. You had mentioned that you were going for your master's. Could you talk a little bit more about that as well?
Yes. Never thought I'd be, starting my master's in a technical career field, being a history guy. I originally wanted to be a college professor of anthropology, but I guess things change, and I'm glad they did. I'm so gracious for my, being accepted in the Space Force, and I love my job. But right now, I'm about to, in January, I'm starting a master's in information technology. So I still do love IT. It's what I was, did when I was in the Air Force. But I think it's definitely a career advancement for me in the Space Force also, just knowing some of the bigger picture things. So that's definitely going to be an exciting chapter.
It's very awesome. It's really good to see that you're kind of carrying on the tradition of IT, specifically like within the Space Force.
I enjoy it.
Uh-huh.
I do physical duty sometimes too, and I get excited when I get to fix some things. Sometimes I'm like, yes. But I mean, that's coming back to that the support versus mission mindset, and sometimes it's hard to get out of that support mindset because that's what you're used to. So like.
Mm-hmm.
You don't always realize that, like, no, you are the person doing the mission now. Like, you're not here to fix the computer. But I mean, I like tinkering with that stuff. So,
Well, it's good to know that since you are the person doing, currently undergoing or just like, working through the mission, you could still fix the computer if you needed to, right?
exactly.
That's amazing. Honestly, like I think it's amazing what you've spoken about today, and like all of the opportunities that you've had throughout your career in the military, U.S. Air Force and U.S. Space Force. I guess I did want to ask, like, where could like anyone that was interested in maybe like following in your footsteps, where could they go for more information about your job and those like it?
So, definitely Air Force, Space Force recruiting. So, I'm pretty sure most of the recruiters now are still Air Force, but Space Force will get there. That's definitely a good place. Always the Space Force website will definitely give you more insight to this, and some symposiums like this, like interviews, it definitely gets the word out of like what we do. Because even nowadays, like I'll be like going into a gas station after I get off at work, still being in uniform, because I'm on the way home, and people will look at me like, "Oh, Space Force, that's a thing," and then I have to give my little elevator spiel to them. Do, and it's just funny because like there's not a whole lot of word of us out there, so the more word we get out, the better it is for like the service in general.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just like in general preparation for like, just going in and speaking to people from the Space Force, I did my own research and I realized, it's an initiative that's been around for a really long time. And it's something that, I feel like the military has been trying to make official for quite some time, ever since like NASA kind of split from the Air Force and kind of left like, like a slight gap there in terms of like, like having an official like space oriented branch of the military. So, I mean, it's really interesting. I think like, the more people learn about it, the more they'll come to realize, it's something that has always been around, just never officially called its own branch of the military, I would say.
Yeah, so pretty much we were Air Force Space Camp, and then we just needed to be our own service, just to better have because we were always, Air Force is always going to try to go a little bit more towards like the air combat side of things. So Space Force did need to become its own branch, just to focus purely on space and get the funding it required.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So it's amazing to hear that all of that preparation, hard work is going towards like some efforts that are keeping us all safe and maintaining our safety here. Absolutely. Well, let's see here. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'd be remiss in not mentioning that we do have some comments here. We had AB7NY, who is a penetration tester, who was joining us with a smiley face. So thanks for joining us. For anyone else that's like joining us for the hackathon this weekend, just bear in mind, if you are hacking away at something today, you can win a special prize if you develop a space-themed project, and it's going to give you a prize from the United States Space Force as well. So, bear that in mind. Definitely, try to grind your wheels and see what you come up with. Outside of that, Specialist Carrino, such a pleasure to have you today. Really, thanks for stopping by and just
really
dropping all this knowledge.
Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure everyone else that was watching was very keen on kind of absorbing all of your experience as well with the United States Space Force and Air Force. Once again, if y'all are interested in looking into any of the technology careers that are available within the United States Space Force, drop on over to www.spaceforce.com or speak to your local recruiter. Anything else you want to add before we jump off?
I think you covered everything perfectly.
Awesome. Well, yeah, with that being said, we'll let y'all get back to working on your projects. And thanks so much again for joining us here today.
I really
have a good one.
Having me. You too.
All right, y'all.